Alright, DLMW 664 Productions here, and today I will be restoring this lifelike Delaware and Hudson GP38-2. So, let's get on with it. Alright, before I open this locomotive up, I will show you what is wrong with it. When I turn up the power, only the headlight turns on. Same thing happens when I reverse the direction. I can hear an engine humming, but it is not turning over, so I have to open it up and take it apart. Alright, back on the desk, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these screws that hold the shell to the frame. Now it's pretty simple, it's just a Phillips head screw. You remove both of them and the frame will just pull right off. Just like that. The next step is getting the motor out of the frame and opening the motor up. Now this is done quite simply. You just push these tabs that are on the inside of the motor down. It's best to use a flathead, but I just used the Phillips head because that was in my hand. And it pulls right out. Now here's something you have to be very careful with, and it's not to snap the soldering. That's very important because if you snap the soldering, you're going to have to resolder it, and that's a pain in the rear. But you unscrew these screws that are just holding these plates in here, but hold the plates down because there's a spring underneath it, and if that spring goes flying anywhere, you will never find it. Mark my words on that. I've already lost more than 2 sets of them. Here it is. Small little brass springs, or they look like copper maybe, but remove the other one in just the same manner, making sure not to let the springs go flying. And there you go. You have your brushes inside and you have access to the entire motor assembly without the annoying wires. To get the truck frame off, you just simply pull at it from the back and slide it off. There you go. And I'm beginning to see what might be gumming this up. There's old grease that looks like it's been in there for quite a long time. Before I could get the old grease out, the first thing I'm going to need to do is remove these wheel sets. You can simply do that by holding one in place and rotating the other. However, this one seems to be pretty slack in there on the gear, so I'm just going to pop it out with my fingers. And it comes right out. Same principle for the other side. And they could just go sit right there. But to open the engine up, you will need to remove these 2 screws. Just right there. Those are also Phillips head. So I'm just going to use the same screwdriver I've been using. And this one I've rubbed over a magnet to give it some magnetivity so that I don't lose the screws. That's one. And that is 2. And just like that, you've got access to the inside. For this next part, you must be very careful. When removing the back side off of these motors, gently pry it up and work your way around. I've made the mistake on camera of yanking a motor open, actually on my CSX GP38-2, and the gears flew everywhere. It took me about a month to actually find everything. So, just a word of advice, take your time when going around. Now the gears still did explode everywhere, but it wasn't as bad as the other one. So here's the inside of this motor, and it actually looks like it's in decent condition. The commutator is a little bit dirty, so I think I'll just clean up with a Q-tip. But other than that, everything seems in good condition. All these gears seem like they spun free, it's just the motor that's been gummed up. So I'm going to poke the carbon brushes out again with my screwdriver. They should just pop right out, If they don't, just give them a little tip and give it a tap. There you go. And just like that, here's your disassembled motor assembly. The last thing I'm going to do before I reassemble the motor assembly is clean off the commutator and clean off the carbon brushes. The carbon brushes, as their name implies, have quite a lot of carbon buildup on them. To do that, I will be using my Lionel track eraser, which is made to remove all this carbon from track, but I found it works equally well on motor parts. And results, it works fairly well. So I'll do that to the other one off camera, but the motor assembly itself, the commutator, you just rub it back and forth on the plates and it'll clean off all the gunk. Nice, simple, easy, and effective. If you don't have one of these, I recommend getting one. The first thing you're going to do is put the commutator into the deep plate with the gear facing out. The next thing you do is put the larger gears with the flat side facing up into the bottom pegs, the ones that are usually made out of metal. Then you put the small gears, also facing the same way as the larger gears, facing down. And finally, the largest gear, also facing down. Once you've done that, what you want to do is put grease on the teeth of the gears and a little piece of oil on each of these shafts. That will make sure that the motor runs quietly and efficiently. One of the last things you do is you put this plate on. Now, if you're lucky, this plate will just slide right on, but sometimes you have to do a little bit of persuading with a screwdriver to get that gear to go right into the axle hole. So what I suggest doing is to use a screwdriver to help align it and get the bearing to line up with the gears. Last but not least, you put the carbon brushes into their designated places. Put the wheels on, and they only go on one way, so you can't mess this up. And you put the truck cover on. You can't mess this up either, it goes on one way too. That's why there's the one slot on one side and the other on the other. And I just knocked a carbon brush out, so yay. But nice and simple, just like that. One fully assembled motor assembly. Before you finish reassembly, make sure that the springs go back in where they're supposed to. Then you can take your plates, screw those back on. You just hold them in place and put the screw back in, basically the reverse of what you did. Snap it in, put the shell back on, and test the locomotive. So I will do that off camera, and I'll get back when I test the locomotive. Alright, the whole motor is reassembled, and let's see if our efforts paid off. Well, the motor's turning over, so we know that the commutator's healthy. But the engine is going nowhere. That is likely because of the stripped gear. I'll try moving the engine around a little bit and see if it picks up then. Nothing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the gears out of my parts engine and put them in this, and this should in theory work. So I'm going to do that off camera because it's just a simple transplant, but all the same processes to assembling and disassembling the engine apply. And then I will retest it. Alright, that simple transplant took a little bit longer than expected because I accidentally dropped one of the carbon brushes. What I did to find it was I put a sock over the vacuum cleaner extension and just maneuvered the extension around until I found the brush. So here are the results of that gear transplant. And the engine is now running. However, I'm pretty sure there is something inside the motor block itself that is grinding up against the gears, which is stopping it from working smoothly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, do another transplant and take this, which is the motor assembly that I took parts from, and use it as the motor assembly of this engine. So I'm going to do that, and that'll be the end of the restoration. Alright, the third and hopefully final transplant is now over. So now I'm finally able to test it properly. And it just sparked to life right there. Well, considering this didn't run in the beginning, I think I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to put the shell on it and take it down to the layout to run it in. Well, here goes nothing. Well, I think I'll call that a success. Anyways, one last thing to do on this restoration. That last thing just so happens to be to install a coupler, which is really quite a simple job. You just lift this tab underneath the engine up, slide the coupler in, make sure it goes in, and there you go. I think I'll call this a successful restoration. For now, this is DL&W 664 Productions, signing off.